Alright, so for the remainder of the videos going through this section, what we're going to take a look at now is actually implementing some of the features in the JavaFX libraries. So I want to start by going through a bit of an introduction of JavaFX so we can see the general structure for a program. And then we'll also start to explore some of the different features, at least on a sort of basic or fundamental level at first, and then gradually transition into more advanced features as we go. So the approach that I'm going to take for this is to primarily just write the code in this Sublime Text Editor and then to actually compile and run it on my Mac terminal. So for this very first one, what we're going to take a look at is just the initial setup for a JavaFX application, and then we'll slowly kind of add some additional content or some additional features to it as we go. So the first thing I want to go ahead and do is just save a Java file here. So we'll go ahead and do my first GUI.java. So this is going to be our very first GUI application, but as you're going to see, this is going to be extremely basic without any additional content in it. It's just going to be a window essentially. So the first thing I need to do is start to create my class header. So we'll do public class my first GUI. Go ahead and give that a body, and then we'll go ahead and set up our main method. So we'll do public static void main. Then we'll have our parameter. So it's going to be that string array of arguments. So then the next thing I want to go ahead and do is there's going to be just a single line of code that I put into the main method. And this is going to be a call to this launch method. And the thing that I'm going to pass into this launch method is going to be those arguments that are coming from this, these parameters that go into the main method. So then the question, of course, is where exactly did this launch method come from? So this is not something that we have by default. So this is not like, say, the string class or say the system class, where we don't have to specify any kind of imports in order to access this launch method. Instead, we have to explicitly import something in order to actually use this. So just above this setup with my header and my body for this class, I want to go ahead and introduce an import for this. So we're going to do import. I'm going to do this from the JavaFX library. From there, there's a particular package that I want to access, which is the application package. It's going to be with a lowercase a. And inside of that application package is going to be the application class. That's going to be with a capital A. Okay. And then once I've actually brought this in, now I can actually start trying to use this launch method. Or at least I'm almost there. One additional thing that I need to go ahead and do is make sure that the class that I'm creating here is capable of actually using the methods that are within the application class that I've brought in. And in order to do that, there's a special piece of code that I need to add to this class header. And once we get into more about inheritance, which will come much later, you'll be able to better understand precisely what it is that this particular piece of code is actually doing. But for now, we'll just go ahead and include this and just assume that it works sort of like black magic. So we'll go ahead and do this extends application. And what this is going to do is basically just allow us to use the methods that are inside of this application class. Okay. So then in addition to the launch method that I'm using to actually start up my application, I also need to introduce another method. And for this one, I'm actually going to implement this or provide a definition for this method. So this is going to be a public void start. And the start method will take one parameter, which is going to be a stage. Typically, the name that we'll go with is going to be primary stage. So we'll just do something kind of like this. We'll give this a body. And then inside the body of this, I need to start providing some lines of code. But before I can actually start doing that, there's probably one thing you've noticed already, which is that I've included this stage class type. So naturally, we need to figure out where this is coming from. So this is going to require yet another import statement. So we're going to do import javafx.stage. This will be the stage package with a lowercase s, and then the stage class with a capital S. Okay. So at this point now I have access to an actual stage. And so then inside of here, I want to go ahead and include just 2 lines of code for this for right now. So the stage is essentially going to represent the application window. And I'm going to use this to set up a title and then to actually display this to the monitor. So the first one, we're going to use that primary stage. And then I can go ahead and call a method on this primary stage object. This will be set title. We'll do my first GUI application. And then the next line is going to be to actually display this to the console or to the monitor, the screen itself. I'll do primary stage dot show, and that will actually display it so we can actually see it. So now that I've got all this set up, I can go ahead and compile this and then run it. So coming over here, we'll do Javac, do my first GUI.java. So go ahead and compile that, and then we'll run it. Okay, so at this point now, we should have this little application window right here. We'll see that the title for it has been set up. Depending on the computer system that you're on, you'll see the little close, minimize, and expand buttons, either in the upper left or upper right-hand corner. In my case, since it's a Mac, this will be in the upper left-hand corner. And we'll also see that we've got a little window right here where all of our content should go, but currently it's empty because if we look at the code itself, we'll notice that while we specified a title and we specified that it should be displayed, we haven't actually added any content to it. So that content is going to come in the form of either containers, which are things we put more content inside of, or it's going to be controls, which are sort of the final visual elements that we want to display to our application window. So I'll go into more detail about that as we start to explore how to actually create a scene, so we can actually start adding some content to this, which will come in the next part. But before I get into that, there's one additional point that I want to make about this, the way that I've written this code, which is that I've started to set up a couple of imports here, and you'll notice that both of these imports are dependent on this JavaFX library. So both of these things are being fetched from the JavaFX library, and I want to make very clear why it is that I'm doing this as two separate imports instead of something like, say, maybe if I remove these two, doing something kind of like this. Okay. So there are a couple of reasons why it is that I choose not to do it this way. So keep in mind that this wildcard import, the star that I've included, this is typically meant to indicate that I want to import all of the content, so all of the Java files that are contained within a particular package. In this particular case, I can't actually do this, or at least this won't really behave the way that I intend for it to, because of the fact that the JavaFX library primarily just consists of additional packages, say like this application package or the stage package. And this import isn't going to look inside of those packages to find other Java files to import. Instead, it kind of just looks for the Java files that are at the level of the JavaFX library itself. So this won't actually be able to get any of the files that I'm looking for, and it doesn't really do what I intend for it to do. The other problem that I have with this is that I want to start getting into this habit of only ever importing as much as I'm ever going to need in my application. So in this case, just the application and the stage class. These are the only things I needed, so they're the only things I imported. And I want to avoid importing too many additional classes beyond that, or really just any additional classes beyond that. And there's a particular reason why I want to do this, and it's not necessarily the reason that you might be thinking, which in certain other programming languages, you might be thinking, well, I don't really want to import everything because I'm not going to use everything, and then I have all this additional unused code, so it kind of just increases the size of my program unnecessarily. That's not actually the case. In the case for Java, it doesn't really matter if you import a particular package or a particular file or not. Those things will always be present on your system, so it doesn't actually have any impact on the size of your programs. Instead, the reason why I choose to do this is because of the fact that I want to try to minimize the number of features that I'm bringing into my application because of the names themselves. And what I mean by that is that if I started to import everything that's in the JavaFX library, say I go through every one of the packages and start doing a wildcard import to bring in all the classes in each of those packages, there's going to be a certain point where I can't keep track of the names of all of the classes or variables or methods that I've brought in. And because of that, I can't be too sure if I create my own custom classes, methods, or variables that I haven't accidentally created something that already exists and would thus create some kind of conflict between this already existing class or feature that's inside of the JavaFX library, or if I'm going to be using my own custom class whenever I try to execute something. So in order to avoid these naming conflicts that I might run into, I want to try to minimize the number of classes that I'm going to bring in. This way then, I don't have to try to keep track of everything that's contained in the JavaFX library itself. Instead, the only thing I have to be concerned with is just the exact imports that I've specified. And then it's much easier to track which names are still available to me within the application that I'm trying to build. Okay. So at this point now we can wrap up on this particular video. In the next one, I'll start to explore some additional classes that we can add to this application so we can actually start filling this out with some additional content. And then at that point, we can also explore how to actually go about designing our applications before we actually start to implement them as well.